Good afternoon, everybody. It's Scott Dillon here from the SAP Cloud Platform team for North America, and it's Function as a Service Day. So as everybody knows, the goal of the SAP Cloud Platform Garage series is to peel back the onion on one service only, because there's many services in there. So we try to take a couple of small scenarios, excuse me, introduce you to the topic via a featured speaker. So we have Carsten Strothman with me today. He'll introduce himself in a minute. We kind of go through a couple of scenarios and we show you some code and try to wrap it up. And so the goal is to be finished in about an hour. So let me just flip over here to our featured speaker slide. So Carsten, what do you do for SAP?
Yeah, hello from my side to everybody as well. My name is Carsten Strothman. I'm a product manager in Walldorf, and I focus on specific topics in the cloud platform. That is side-by-side extensions and serverless runtime, enterprise messaging, eventing, and so on. So everything basically fits together under the umbrella term extensions.
Awesome. And so this is not your first time here, right, Carsten? You were here with me before.
Yeah, it's actually my third time. And I'm glad to be here again.
Yeah, so Carsten's a very nice guy. So we like to have the smart people back on the garage so we get the information out to the audience, which is the idea. So we always, so one thing that we try to do, which we don't have today, unfortunately, is someone dedicated to manning the Q&A pod. So I will commit to the following. If I'm not able to answer the question in the Q&A pod as Carsten's talking or vice versa, we will get the answers sent out to you as part of the email follow-up that goes out. So I commit to that and we'll make that happen. And so as you all know, we typically, well, for those of you that are here for the first time, you don't know, we try to start with a poll. So I'm going to bring up a poll. It's a chance for you to be a little bit interactive. Tell us if it's your first time here. We normally give 30 seconds because there's a 30-second delay between us and what we see, and you can kind of just go in there, and this is your first time here. It just kind of gives us an idea if people are coming back because we're saying something they want to hear, or if it's brand new people, which is all good. And you can just hit the yes or no, and then I'll pop over to the results slide and we can kind of have a look at that. And so we've got about a 60-40 split at the moment, not their first time here, which shows I think we're doing something good and we're managing to pull in some new people, which is also good, Carsten. So what we will do now is I'm going to flip over to another poll, and this just gives us, we only do 2 polls, so it's not long. It just gives us an idea as we're doing the session today. It gives us a little bit of immediate context as to whether or not you've heard of this topic before. And to be honest with you, going back 3 or 4 months ago, it was pretty new to me. I think it's a pretty compelling topic, which we'll get into and how we can use them, which is kind of cool. But this whole idea of FAAS or function as a service, have you considered using it as part of your architecture? If so, when, where? But just a simple yes or no, and then we'll let Carsten see the result of that. So as he's going through, he can maybe use that. So you see, Carsten, we've got 77% of people that have answered have never considered using FAAS. And if they're like me, they probably haven't really heard about it or been educated on it until today. So today's the day. So this is good. So I'm just going to do a quick recap. So back in November, we took a decision that over the course of 8 to 10 garage sessions, we would try to show people very prescriptively how they could be building out applications with SAP Cloud Platform. So we've done a session, as an example, in the user interface bucket on the mobile development kit. We've done the session on how to use CAP, which is the SAP Cloud Platform Application Programming Model. That was back in January. So if you want to go back and watch the replay on YouTube, go for it. You can go to the SAP Technology channel. And then we did a session on enterprise messaging. And then I think last month or the month before, we did the session on workflow. But you see here, some messages are being published to the enterprise message bus, and that's great. But they're not much use unless we can get access to them and react to them with something. And so what we did in the previous session is we created this workflow, and this workflow is for the review of a safety incident. But then the question remains, when we create an incident, where's the magic happening to invoke that workflow? And today, a little bit of that magic will be revealed. So we will be going through exactly how to create this function as a service. It's not that complicated. If you've got a Node.js skill set, you'll be very much at home. And then we're just going to show you kind of the wrapper that SAP puts around some of this stuff to make it easy. So that's the scenario. And in a few minutes after Karsten goes through his stuff, I'll have you create an incident. We'll see how that works. And then we'll dive into the code that I'm using to make that happen. So without further ado, Karsten, it's over to you to give us like the quick 20, 25-minute overview function, show us some demos, show us some cool stuff. Take it away, Mr. Strothman.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And actually, those slides perfectly fit to the poll. I will try to give you a big picture now. Why are we going for serverless runtime for functions as a service in an SAP context? And it's going to be extensions first. What are extensions? Why would you want to do that? Then I will quickly give an introduction into event-driven architectures. And then we'll finally get to serverless and to functions as a service. That's the idea here. Now, but let's start with my most beautiful slide here. And this is actually a real-world use case that happened that gave me an idea what side-by-side extensions are really about, and it happened right before Christmas. We had bought a new washer, and we had sold the old one over the internet. The guy who had bought the washer, the used one, he showed up with his car on a Saturday morning. I still remember at 11 o'clock. He tried to load it into his car. It didn't fit. His initial idea had been to load it onto his back seat. Didn't even make it through the door. Then he tried to fit it into his trunk, didn't work. So basically his automotive core, his core system to handle that business case did not work. He was very frustrated. I was very frustrated, honestly. So he drove home and he came back roughly an hour later and he had attached a trailer to his car. And he loaded the washing machine onto the trailer, drove it home, called me another hour later, was like, hey, Carsten, perfect. The washer is great, it works. And to me, that was a very impressive proof point for side-by-side extensibility. Because as said, the core solution had not worked. It was not fitting for the business case. And side-by-side, we managed to transport the washing machine. And there are some similarities to the IT world. You could see the car as a backend, as an S4 system. There are certain means of in-app extensions. So you could do certain things there if the extension goes beyond what S4 is able to do. Then you could use the cloud platform to build your side-by-side extension there. And this is not for every use case. Most of the stuff will still happen in the backend system. Nevertheless, for some use cases that you cannot handle in the backend, the cloud platform is a perfect fit there. And as said, the real world really explains things very well. Because if you look at the trailer, I could not connect the trailer to my car. Why? Because I don't have a trailer hitch. In the IT world, what would the trailer hitch be? It would be APIs or events. So to connect the cloud platform to the backend system, you would need suitable APIs and events. Let's quickly do it more formal. So what are extensions? We're talking about enhancements without impairing your existing backend system functions. So it would be adding new functionality, like adding an additional step to a business process, for example, or it would be modifying functionality that you already have. And this could be done for two reasons. You could either optimize your business processes or you could innovate. So the cloud platform would be your innovation platform there. Now, let's look a little bit closer at event-driven architectures. As said, the trailer hitch in the example before, you somehow need to connect the backend system. And I would like to look at a real-world example first. The spider's web over there. This, in the real world, can be seen as an event broker, because with vibrations, it would transport events. In this case, events would be significant changes of status to the spider's web. So for example, a bug landing in there, or a leaf ending in there. And the spider you can see as an event consumer. So the spider sits in the middle of the spider's web typically and waits for events to happen. It's a very efficient way of hunting, basically. And once the event takes place, the spider gets informed with the vibrations of the event and then reacts to that. Unless it's a vegetarian spider, it's probably going to go for the bug right there. So it can basically pick which event makes sense, and this is the same in the IT world. On the right hand side, you can see basically a setup how this would look like with an SAP backend. So the backend would be on the left hand side. It would be firing an event. Enterprise messaging would then transport this event to consumers, kind of like the spiders, that that are consuming those events. So they are listening and reacting to those events. So that's the idea. Basically, the functions in the end, this would be our consumer. They get actively informed of changes that are happening on the backend side or wherever the event basically comes from. On the bottom of this slide, you can actually see an event, actually an event in Cloud Event style. Cloud Events is basically an initiative by a number of software companies to come up with a common approach, with a common format to describe events, so that those are exchangeable between, for example, SAP, Google, Microsoft, and so on. These companies are supporting that initiative. So we could consume a Microsoft or a Google event, for example, and the structure is exactly the same. You see a type on the top left, so BO, sales order created. So a sales order would have been created in an SAP backend. And then there is data down there that would come with the event.
So Carson, just before you move on to the next slide, so this event structure that we have at the bottom that you've outlined, it's not mandatory for people to use it. It's a suggested format that SAP will be adopting for some of the SAP events. But as an example today, I'm using an event that I kind of made up and a structure that I made up, right? So you don't have to use that format.
No, you do not have to use that format. As said, it's going to be an industry standard. This is what our backends typically are going to fire.
Gotcha.
And to be absolutely honest there, not every single SAP backend currently uses this format. So S/4HANA, for example, does. If you look at success factors, there are still data events, and the structure there is different. Okay, quickly to look into the enterprise messaging part, because that is going to be important. What you see here are queues. That is basically a first in, first out structure. This is used to buffer events. So you write into the queue, and then the event consumer picks up the event. On top of that, on the left-hand side, you do see a topic. A topic can be seen kind of like a radio. You write to a topic, and you only get informed if you have the radio switched on and you are listening to it. And Scott will use the setup later on today. He's going to write into the topic and then do a queue subscription to take advantage of both worlds. So the queue is going to listen to the topic and will put the event in the queue. That way it does not get lost, and it definitely gets consumed. For my example, I will just use a queue before, because I'm just going to use the enterprise messaging tool set there. Good, then let's move quickly on to the next slide. Okay, that's the animation, event gets moved over. Serverless and function as a service. So what is serverless? Serverless is a cloud-native paradigm that has been around for a few years. The idea there is that computing resources are hidden, meaning developers, users are not aware that there are servers there, even if they're just hidden. So the cloud provider takes care. The cloud provider operates everything for you, and you don't have to worry. So on the top right, you basically see 6 characteristics that define serverless. So the servers are hidden away. It's vendor operated, so I could not move my server into Scott's office and he would operate it for me. So it really has to be a cloud vendor operating your servers. There is automated scaling and scaling in very small steps. The point is, it does not matter to you at all whether you put no load on or all the load in the world. The cloud provider really has to take care. So it's really taking that operations, that maintenance burden off your shoulders. And then the two icons to the right, they are very important, and those are going to be game changers in the future. It's pay-per-use, and it's microbilling. So you only pay when you're using serverless services or components, and you get charged in exactly for what you have used. So for the exact amount of CPU time used, and for the exact amount of RAM used, for example, which has the advantage you only pay when the functions or the serverless service is executed. Functions as a service, these are basically compute services to execute pieces of code in a serverless environment for you. I've never heard or read the term microfunctions, but in the end, that's what it is. So we're talking about very small atomic pieces of code, ideally, that get executed. And these get executed, these pieces of code get executed in response to triggers. These triggers could be, for example, HTTP requests or timers or events. So the event, let's move to the bottom. So the event comes in, this triggers the execution of the function. The function is started up. So it was sleeping before. You can see the bed on the left. So the function wakes up, starts up, executes your piece of code. And then, and this is very important, functions are ephemeral. So once a function goes to sleep again, everything that was was computed in the function, was kept in the function, and variables and so on is gone. So you need to write that output somewhere. So implementation gets executed, you write the output. Scott later on will use a service for that. He will call a workflow service. And then the function shuts down and goes to sleep again. This is basically how this
So Carsten,
works.
a couple of questions. So number one, this trigger idea, that something happens that basically wakes up the code. So my first clarification point is that these triggers can be external to SAP, right? It doesn't have to be an SAP S4 trigger. It can be any type of trigger, right? For that matter, as long as it conforms to one of the predefined trigger types like HTTP, like AMQP. That's my first qualification. And number two, the code that you're referring to, these pieces of code, what type of code are we talking about here?
We are talking about Node.js code in our case that you can execute. So we're supporting currently Node.js 8 and Node.js 10, and you will later on see that it's functions that you write, that you code, and those get then executed. And in respect to the triggers, yes, you're right. This is the entire idea behind cloud events, that you can consume events from other vendors as well, external vendors, your own events if you want to create them. So we're completely open there.
Right. So really what I found when I started this with you back a few weeks ago, really the learning curve for people, if they already know Node.js, if they don't know Node.js, they have to learn it. And that's really a JavaScript thing. So you learn some JavaScript, then you know Node.js, and you can just kind of learn the shell that we put around it. So people that are familiar with JavaScript and Node.js, this is something that they will pick up like that, right? Like pretty quickly.
We will see. I mean, in the end, I was saying atomic. Well, I probably wasn't. I was saying microfunction, but I could have said atomic for a reason. We will see our function in a minute, and we'll see what it does and how long it really is. It's very small for what it does, and this is actually the beauty of it.
Perfect. Let's get going then. We're running out of time. You're running out of time.
Yeah.
No pressure, but hurry up.
Yes. Okay. Let me quickly summarize things here. The idea for SAP is to really go for extensions here. So we want to make it as easy as possible to extend SAP backend systems. For that, you can use event-driven extensions, and serverless is a perfect means to react to those events. And in the end, the idea is to bring together loose coupling, so this asynchronous, event-driven mode of connecting systems, and a tight integration into the SAP Cosmos at the same time. So we want you to take advantage of both worlds. at the same time, and that's the goal. I will be really quick in respect to the advantages: speed, money, time. Yes, that's obvious. What is very important to me, and specifically during these times, is the flexibility. So you can adjust your business processes very quickly, very easily. You can add additional steps easily. You could add entire new apps in just hours or days. And yeah, it's quite nice that serverless runtime and enterprise messaging and the backends together offer this opportunity. And with that said, I think what I would like to do is I would quickly like to show you and create our first function there. So let me show you what all of this is about, and let me try to quickly share my screen. And I think I should try to refresh everything very quickly to see. I guess this one probably not. So you should be able to see my screen right now. Scott, maybe give me a quick hint once you can see it. We should know, I think. Good. So just to show you where you can start this, we are in the SAP account, and we are in the subscription section here. And I would now, I've already started them, I would now start two applications, the Extension Center right now and Enterprise Messaging. These are the two applications I will use. And I think I will quickly reload just in case that. Okay, that is fine. That is fine. Scott, I hear your microphone.
Yeah, no, sorry. So I was just waiting for the opportunity to say something here. So for folks that are just there, you'll notice that he clicked on subscriptions. So sometimes you'll find services under services, and in this case, you go to subscriptions, and then there's a built-in application for you to use as part of the Extension Center and Enterprise Messaging. So you'll see that 100%.
Okay, then let me quickly move over to Enterprise Messaging again. What I have done here is I have created the queue I had been talking about, because this is what I will later on use to buffer the AMQP events. It's basically a standard Enterprise Messaging queue. There's a test tool here as well. This is which I will use to fire the events later on. Now let me go to the Extension Center. And this is one of the tools that you use for creating functions. There are three tools, actually. There's a command line interface, which you will see later on as well. This is for more advanced developers that would like to use their own development environment and use the command line interface to deploy and to go for the logs and everything. Then there is this Extension Center, which is for developers, for people that want to try it out, that want to get started, because it's a very easy way, wizard-based, to create your functions. This is what you will see in a minute. And there's a third option, that's the Business Application Studio. This is not GA yet. It will come in some of the next months, meaning Business Application Studio is GA, to be specific. The serverless support for the BizApp Studio is not yet, but it will come. Good. Now let's create our first extension here. And I think I can go full screen. So first step, I will select a template. I will go for one with the function enter-trigger. In a second step, I will name my extension. I will just put a C in front of the standard extension name. You can pick a runtime. Nodejs 8 and 10. Then I will click on the next step. So there I provide a name for the function. First one was for the extension project. Trigger name here in this wizard, you can select an HTTP trigger or a timer trigger. I will go for the HTTP one, and that's already it.
So Carson, just so we're 100% clear in netting this out. So this really means, and I'm going to net this out as simply as I can for myself only, we're basically going to end up with a little bit of Node.js code that's sitting somewhere managed by SAP, and through a HTTP call, which is why it's a HTTP trigger, we can activate that code. Basically, that's what we're saying with this example, right?
Exactly. That's what we're saying.
Perfect.
And once the HTTP trigger comes in, the function gets started up, executes, goes to sleep again. This is how it works.
Okay.
And now all I have to do is click create, function gets created. Actually, the extension gets created, and we are jumping into the code view. You were already seeing the code. I would like to start at the central document first. This is the FAAS.json. There's some general information. So the project name, we've picked C extension, the version, the runtime, we've picked Node.js. The library basically points you to where the actual code is, where the implementation is. So this is the lib folder right there. Then let me start at the bottom because that's easiest. So here we do have a trigger. This is the HTTP trigger. This is what starts up the function. Then there's actually the function here. So the module is here and the handler function. So this basically points towards the code, to the actual implementation. And then there are two parts of this file that are empty: secrets and configs. Configs basically hold your configuration data that you would need in your function, for example, APIs and so on. Secrets is basically configuration data that you want to keep confidential. So it gets encrypted and it gets stored in a safe way so that nobody else is able to access that. This is basically what a typical function extension project looks like. And now let's quickly go here. I will already delete this line. And what we're going to do, as you can see, it's going to just return hello world from a function. We'll click save and deploy. You can see the deployment status up here. We're waiting for the deployment. Now it's done. We're going to the form view. I want to go to the triggers here. And now you can see my trigger, C trigger, which is an HTTP trigger. Now I'm going for the trigger details for a reason, because if I click on here, I get my hello world from a function. So you have just seen how I created the first function here, and we've deployed it quickly, and we've executed it. So now the next thing that I would like to do is I would like to add a trigger, and I would like to add an event-driven trigger. I just call it CAMQP. It's following the AMQP protocol, so Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. So we're going to step 2, and this is, remember, I copied com/sub SCP Garage Carsten, so my queue name. I need that here. So I basically put the queue name in. I will add this. I can
and just for people watching, the reason why the queue name is so long is that you always have to have the namespace in front of it. So there's a namespace / the queue name, which is why it comes across as com.scp Garage Carsten. So basically that's why, if you're wondering.
Yes, and if you would receive this event from an S4 backend system, for example, there would be a path identifying where it's really coming from. Okay, now there would be outgoing links. We would need this if we would like to send an event back. We don't want to do that, so we'll skip it. Now in this section, I could add filters. So for the events going into the queue, I could then decide on specific criteria, and I actually can just click this here. So for example, the message properties, I could decide on which function to call. So there are more opportunities here in respect to which functions to execute and have more functions in there in a single extension project. For now, I will just go for one and keep it simple. So you can see the rules here. It's going to take in the filter section every single event that comes in, and it's going to execute C function. And no matter what happens, even if there's a failure, we are going to accept the event. So we will take the event out of the queue. We could reject it as well and leave it in the queue. And now with that said, I will go to step 5. Now we need to enter the credentials, which now I would not be happy about because I would have to look that up. But there is a nice concept called credential store and service registration. We have registered our service before with the serverless runtime, so I will just use this information here. So I've added the trigger. So I have added the trigger here, and in the next step, what I will do now is I will quickly go over to the code view of this function. And what it does right now it does hello world from a function, and we can adjust that from, we can keep a function triggered by AMQP. Okay, so and something that should be fine now. So let's just save and deploy. So now again, it gets deployed. Then we would go over to the logs once that is done. You can see the logs, there's nothing in there. I will go over to enterprise messaging. You see the queue is empty, there's nothing in here, and now we have to be quick. I will publish to that queue. I will select, meaning an action. I will select the queue that I'm going to publish to. I will select the client. And here at this point in time, doesn't matter what I'm going to put in because it's going to react on every message anyway. And I will click publish. So the message has been published. You can see there's a one here. And now if we're quick, we can see the one in the queue and it has been consumed. So if the message disappears here, it means the function has taken out the event, got started up and got executed. And if we now go to the extension center, the post happened, but I think I must have done something wrong in my... Oh, true. I have done something wrong here. That cannot work. So I need to go for console.log because otherwise...
you won't see it.
We won't see it in the logs. Exactly.
But that's the benefit, Carsten, of being, like I tell people on this series all the time, we're working without a net here. So there's no net to save you when you do a little typo like that. So people know it's real. There's no smoke and mirrors in the garage. And that's sometimes, mostly it's good, but sometimes, you know, we get the occasional glitch, which is fine.
Yes, it's okay. I will send, the thing is you can see that it went through anyway, but I'll do that again.
It adds an element of authenticity, Carsten. It's all good.
Let me fire again. You can see it there, and now it has gotten consumed. And now, hopefully, if we go to the logs, we should be able to see it. And there we are. Hello world from a function triggered by AMQP. Now let's do the next thing. Let's do the next thing here. I will now, and I think I can already switch away from full screen mode. I will click the download button. So I'm downloading what I have built on the C extension to my local drive here. Let me just quickly move this over into my demo folder. And once I have done that, I will move the demo folder on the second screen so that you can see it. Here we are. So I've downloaded it into the demo folder. This is basically what we have created. Now, what I will do is I will open up this folder, the C extension folder, and I will open up with Visual Studio Code. So in the lib folder, you can see my coding here. Hello world from a function triggered by AMQP. And we'll just say deployed by the CLI. Okay, I will just quickly save that. And now I will move the CLI over. I have already gone in here in the folder. You see the C extension. Let me just quickly go in. Here we are. This is the content of that folder. So now what I will show you is extension factory serverless runtime. This is our tool, our command line interface. You will later on with Scott see that he has the name XFSRT CLI. I've renamed it so that it's a little bit shorter. If you download it from the official SAP website, you'll get XFSRT CLI. I'm just too lazy typing that all the time. So now, if you type that in, you get the available commands here. So the FAAS operations here are what we care about. Let me quickly go in there, and you can see again what's available. So you could list the function as a service instances. You could see the registered services with the service operations. We will go for the project operations, and I will speed up a little bit now, and I will just deploy what we have created. So this is the command, and now it's going to be deploying. The deployment has started. Deployment is done. And if we go to the extension center now, and we would go to the code and refresh this, we should have our updated code in here. Okay, that's a package JSON. So triggered by AMQP, deployed by the CPU, by the command line interface. So that has been deployed. I can maintain it now even here if I want to. And now if I can play the same game again, so I can publish a message to a queue, and we can just keep it simple, ABC, publish the message, and then you would see exactly the same game. So it appears here, it gets consumed, and yeah, if you look into the logs, and I think we can still do that. I need to select the function. Hello world from a function triggered by AMQP, deployed by CLI. And there's just one thing I quickly would like to show.
You have 30 seconds, Carson. I'm shutting you down.
That is okay. So if we would like to show the event data, all we would have to do is console.log event data. Then it really prints out what it has taken in, and you could work on that data. Scott will in a minute show in detail how that goes. And with that, Scott, over to you.
All right. So maybe you can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
And I will share mine. Let's go back up to the top. Well, it was well done, Karsten. Thank you for that. That was a really good overview. So I guess my first question, so we've got 20 minutes left, and I want to show people exactly what we've done to link the parts of, let me just get back over here. Okay, so basically I want to bring people back to this diagram. So just for 30 seconds. So here, get rid of that. So here on this diagram, people have this UI, and if folks have been here before, you can do this now, and I would encourage you to do so. So type it in a browser, bit.ly/incident, uppercase I, uppercase C, uppercase F. So incident CF. So try that for me, somebody online. We've got lots of people online today. So bit.ly/incident, uppercase I, uppercase C, uppercase F, which is Cloud Foundry. So incident Cloud Foundry. So someone get in there and trigger a few events for me, if you wouldn't mind. So I see my logs moving. I know at least one person is doing it. If we get a few more, that'd be amazing. And so then what's going to happen, just going back to here now. So right here now, somebody is in there executing some events for me. And these events are being pushed over to CAP, and they're being published to the enterprise message bus. What I want to do is invoke this workflow. So for folks that were present about a month back, we built out this workflow. And you can see in this workflow, it basically accepts an incident ID in this function. And there's a start event here. And basically, this start event, you can trigger that with an API. So you basically call the API, and then you can trigger the workflow. So what's happening now is that people are in here creating an event for me as per my request, and they're sending events on the enterprise messaging bus, and something is here picking it up, which is this function, which is what I want to show you. So just to kind of, so this was a 49. My assumption is, yep, we've already gone to 50. So we've got at least 2 or 3 events that have been fired through, and the function is executed, picked it up, and basically, and I always ask people post nice pictures if they put a picture. So hopefully nobody put anything obscene in there, which is nice that no one did that, which is good. Thank you. I appreciate the nice audience. So let's go take a look on how we would do that. So the question, one of the questions I had, Carson, as we're bringing up the Visual Studio to show people how this works, why would I decide to use Visual Studio Code compared to the Cockpit? Under what circumstances would I do that? So ponder that for a second while I walk through the structure and ask you a few questions and just elaborate on this. So 2 things are at play here that I want to mention, which was something that I learned as kind of as I went. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to execute a command here in the command window that hopefully that people can see. So when you're running a function in the cloud, it's likely, unless your function is extremely simple, you'll want to access and make use of other services in the cloud. So Cloud Foundry has this notion, this technical concept called a service key, which basically has all the credentials and everything you need about it in order to execute it. So what functions let you do is basically register any services that you want to use in your function, and you basically register them using the service key. So you can see here, I've got Garage Series, MSK, Workflow 1, and I've got these two services registered. And so you might be thinking, well, why is he telling me that? Because what you're going to show you now is the FAAS.json. Karsten had showed you one already. This one's a little bit more involved, but not that much. And you can see one of the things that's inside of it is you've got this services category where I list two, emserve and workflow.serve. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, hold on a second, the values here are blank. What's going on? Well, the reality is when you deploy the function to the cloud, we can populate this other file over here called a values.yaml. And now if you remember back, if I put these up two side by side, just to kind of make the mapping here for you, you can see I've got workflow 1, which is the service I registered, and I'm using that value here inside my values.yaml. So at runtime, when the function runs, it can reach in the Cloud Foundry, bring back the information it needs to call that workflow engine. So that's really what that's all about. And then Carson had shown you the structure, which is what you see here. It basically says, hey, I've got a trigger. It's called safety incidents, and it's got a type of AMQP, Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. It's got this service called emserve. It's got a configuration called emconfiguration. So then as you look through this FAAS.json file, you'll see here there's a reference to emconfig, which is up top. You've got this emserve, which we just kind of explained what that's about. And then we got the two services that are listed. But now, Karsten, also in this project structure, one of the things that we really didn't get into a lot, which maybe you can just talk about for a second, I do have this config thing here. So I got this name called emconfiguration, and it points to this directory. Like when and where would I be using that?
This is basically to configure your triggers. So if you drill a little bit deeper into the directory there, there's this amqp.json, and there's the bind.json. And as you can see, there is the queue that we have configured. So the AMQP basically tells you, okay, the trigger is going to, meaning the event that is going to trigger the function, is going to come in via this queue. That's the source address here. And then in the bind.json, we will bind this to the function. So in there, you should see that the function gets executed. And then there are the rules in there that I was pointing out quickly before, where you can decide, depending on the event coming in, you could dig deeper in the event and then decide, okay, what am I going to do? First of all, which function am I gonna call? So you could do this in a very fine granular way. And on top of that, you could say, okay, if something goes wrong, then I'm still going to accept the event, which means the event has disappeared from the queue. Or I could say, I'm going to reject this, so the event still stays in the queue.
Perfect.
So
perfect. Now I want to just show someone something here, Carson, just for 30 seconds. So what we can see here, here's my source address, just as Carson is outlining. And now what we're seeing on the right-hand side, notice Karsten was using this queue called Karsten. And we had another queue called safety incident created. And we have a third queue called safety incidents. Notice it's 0, 0, and 14. Well, why do you suppose this one is a 14? Well, because I haven't deployed a function that's pulling those messages off yet. So as people were online, when I asked people to test, they went in there, and I'm sure they did. They created some new incidents for me. I need more beer. Who doesn't? SAP Garage is the best. Love it. So this is awesome. So thank you for that. So as people were going in there, creating those messages, we can see they've been stockpiling. So this is, of course, exactly what you want. So for those situations where you need a guaranteed delivery and you need to make sure that the message goes from source to target. This is exactly what we want to see. So, but just to let people know that this is where that linkage is done. So that's well done, Carson. And then on this bind, you can see in the example you had done before, that's exactly what it is. So we have this start garage flow, the accept has been flagged, and the content is application JSON. So let's take a look now at the actual code. So just one thing to highlight that was, I didn't quite get this at the very beginning, but you basically have a function called start garage workflow, and this module basically lists the name of the JavaScript file that gets executed to implement that function. So basically, when I click on this index.js, you see the code that we're now going to deploy. So Carson, we're not doing too bad on time. I might change this up a little bit just to maybe deploy it twice instead of 3 times as per our testing earlier, just because of the time, just to make sure we get finished. Well, let's see. So basically, I want to go back. Where is my screen? Again, I don't know if people are seeing the screen online. I hope they do. But I want to go back down to here. I probably have to stop sharing, don't I? Yeah, I'm not going to stop sharing at this point. So essentially what we have to do, we need to do 3 things in order to call this workflow. So for folks that are not familiar with the workflow API, I'm just going to bring it up quickly. So when you go to the API hub and you drill in to specifically the workflow API for Cloud Foundry, you will see here post V1 workflow instances. So there's a very specific structure, and you notice that the payload is a definition ID and a context. So we need to construct that. So what you can see here right off the bat, I'm just going to uncomment this section, and I'm going to comment it here. And so as the first deployment of this function, what are we going to do? We're basically going to grab the event data that's coming in here. I want to throw that into the log so you can take a look at it. And then I need to construct the payload for the workflow call so I can invoke the right payload, so I can invoke the right instance of the workflow that we're talking about. So this could be pretty powerful. If you think about all the events you could be generating from ECC or S4, you basically have the ability to publish the event and then subscribe and then execute whatever function you want. So Carson, let's get that deployed. I'm assuming it's the same kind of deployment syntax that you used earlier, right?
Exactly, except for that you're going to use the values.yaml. So you're adding the last part that clearly tells, except on the extension factory serverless runtime command line interface, to use the values.yaml and replace those languages.
Perfect. So I'm gonna...
While you're doing that, one more thing, actually. Scott had been showing the APIs there in api.sap.com. If you go in there, you can already find a number of events listed there. So in the long run, you will find all events that SAP supports exactly in there, and you can drill into the details as well.
Everything takes longer when we're live, Carson. It usually takes 2 seconds, but today it took about 10. Not a big deal. So anyway, so we see that this has been deployed. So now if we go back, you can see here in the description, it's called garage function. If we go back to the extension center and click on the main tab, I should see a new one. So now I see the garage function. And again, if I just take a peek here now about what's going on, I can go to the logs, select garage workflow, and you can see all of a sudden I've got a whole bunch of events that have been brought in. And well, let's just go through one of them. So you can see the workflow payload, or sorry, the event data, which is the first thing that we had in our log. It basically says, hey, here's the incident ID. And just to comment on this for 30 seconds. So the idea behind messaging is you basically publish an event, which is a really, really small message that says, hey, something has happened in your environment that you'd like to maybe react to or take action on. So the goal is to provide as little information as possible, but typically some sort of unique ID that whatever follow-on process needs to happen has what it needs. So in this case, we take the event ID, and then you can see the event ID is here. And then you can see in the next output, I'm using it to construct the payload that the workflow API needs. So basically it worked. And so I'm sure now if I go back here and I do a refresh, I'm probably going to see it's slowly going to, I don't know why it's 13, it should be like 0, but it decremented it by 1. I'm not sure why, I didn't do the whole bunch, but let's continue. Okay, so Carson, what I'd like to do now is show people quickly what the next part is. So at the very beginning, we talked about, at the beginning of my section, we talked about these services that you can register. So in Cloud Foundry, I've got the workflow service running, and in order to do it, I need to use OAuth credentials. So it's been registered as a service. So by executing this command, context.service get credentials JSON, and specifying the alias that I had back in my values.yaml file, I can get access to that. And so just for the, not to show people all my credentials for it, but I'm basically going to print out one of the credentials, which is the URL that I need to access and call the workflow API. So I've got that there. I'll hit Control S. I'll pop back to the console and I'll deploy this guy quickly. Get that out. And then Carson, one of the questions that I had, which we didn't talk about, is when would someone use Visual Studio Code or the Business Application Studio versus the Cockpit? That would be one question I'd like to talk about.
Well, in the end, the Extension Center Cockpit is really to get you started. It is about trying things out, playing around with it. As soon as you would really go for serious development and would do more, would do real projects, you would either switch over to the CLI, or you would switch over to the Business Application Studio. So the bottom line here is the Extension Center is for monitoring, for seeing what's going on, and on top of that, for playing around and learning, basically, or for creating smaller functions there.
Awesome, awesome. Now I think, here we go. So I just put another one in just to kind of show what's going on. So we've modified the code, and now you can see, yes, we have the event data. We also have the workflow payload, and now we're printing out the URL that's required to call the workflow service. So we've registered the workflow service prior. Sure, I don't want to show you that because it takes too long. Then we reference the service inside the index.js right here. And now the last but not least, we're going to complete the picture. I'm going to take everything out and kind of walk you through what happens next. So clearly, we need to have, actually, Carson, you had a good suggestion yesterday. So here's the URL that we need to call for the workflow. And if I just shove that into a browser window, you will see authentication is required. So, and it's 100% right. You can't execute that without a token. And so as an example, if anybody's working or has worked a lot with Postman, I'm not an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous. Here's a Postman setup where I was calling and testing some of our calls. And you can see when you click on the authorization tab, you've got to set it up with OAuth 2. And in order to do that, you got to get a token. So the moral of the story is you got to get a token. So back in this code, we have it says here token equals await OAuth.token context. And so what we didn't get into, and we won't get into the details of this today, but all you have to know is that this little bit of code here, which you can download from the internet, or you can ask us for it and give it to you, no problem. We'll post the function in GitHub. But the idea is there's going to be, this is going to be used to get the token. So we grab the endpoint URL, we grab the client ID, we grab the client secret using the register workflow service, and then we get a token. So then once we have that token back in the index.json file, we then basically use that to do a post. So let me get rid of this, otherwise I won't get very far. So this return await post, it basically comes down here and it executes the workflow API to then trigger that workflow instance. So back in that architecture diagram that I showed you, it's basically the flow is you create your incident back here, you push the save button, it goes over to cap, CAP is responsible for publishing the event in the format that I chose, and then the enterprise message bus picks it up. In this case, it goes into 3 different queues just for testing. And then the function basically kicks in and says, hey, I wouldn't mind grabbing that. It grabs it, and then in here we can do whatever we want. And so basically here what we're doing is we're starting the workflow. So let's just deploy this last version. And we're going to be right under the wire. People are going to be so happy with me and the marketing team. Let's go. I need to get this out there. I need to do it. I need to be under the wire today, or just by 1 minute maybe, if I can do it. Let's go quickly. So we'll do last test, test for function, triggering a workflow. I always like putting software because that's what I do, and we'll just save that guy. We'll just do a refresh, and just to make sure, last test for function, and we pop over to the extension center. We'll do a refresh, and then voila, here we are. And one of the things I did along the way, just to show you, so here's the REST endpoint that we showed you in the last example. We then printed out the token just to show you. Good luck guessing that, which is why it's so hard to crack, I guess. It's pretty long. So there's the token, and then we use that token to fire off a call to the workflow engine, and we get a 201, which is a successful call to the workflow engine. So that's awesome. So that's, all the way, just kind of uncommenting the code for you to see how that works, and basically the architecture and the structure of how you would set up your own function in 2 different kinds. So quickly, I will go back to the browser window. I will stop sharing my screen quickly. I will pop over to, I'm gonna go past our slide here. Gonna get past this, as everybody knows on the Garage series, we don't go actively looking to talk to you after it's over. If you found this interesting, if you want to have a deeper dive discussion, you would come let us know. You'll register, and then I will reach out to you in the next week or 2 if you want to have a chat, just have a dialogue, do some whiteboard architecture stuff, just generally talk technology. It's always a good time, and I can bring Carson to that conversation as well. And so this is that there, so you can submit that poll. I will also want to mention, this is what we have coming up. So we do have, so next month, the next session will be UI5. So I want to show people how to build that entry app. But in the second half of the session, I want to show people how to build a WebSockets enabled small dashboard subscribing to a queue. So someone publishes an event, how could I update my display in real time instead of having to do a pull? And then of course we have process visibility in July, where we'll show how to put that on top of our workflow. So Karsten, I want to thank you for taking the time to come out today, for running people through what functions are, how they operate. I think everything went very smoothly. We've got a few questions in the window that I'll answer just quickly. Can we use the terminal from the VS Code instead of using a separate terminal? I'm using the DOS terminal. I know other people have used Linux terminals. I don't see why not. As long as you can download the CLI and install it, you're good to go. Can you post the...
Actually, to add to that, Business Application Studio is going to have a terminal as well, so you will have best of both worlds in there at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I don't understand this question from Steve. Steve, can you post the bit website? Bit website. I'm not sure what that means, the bit website. But the next question is, can we utilize third-party Node.js extensions? Yes, you can. So you'll notice at the beginning of the one that I showed, there were 3. And this is one place where, of course, you do need to use VS Code or Business App Studio. So once you want to use a custom module, bring something in, then that gets deployed with your project from the command line. Is this project in GitHub? It is not, but I can easily add it, emit, no problem. And do we have access to all the Node.js modules, such as child process, crypto, etc.? Yeah, you can use whatever module you want. And then Amit said again, do we have this project available in GitHub? I will put it out there. So anybody, I've only got 1 or 2 repos out there. So one, I've got the repo out there for the virtual academy that I'm currently running. If anybody's interested in that, we're doing a 5-week academy. All the content's been posted. So just find my name, github.com, Scott Dillon 1, and you'll see an SCP virtual academy GitHub repository now with 5 weeks of content. Probably take you 2 to 3 hours a week if you want to run through that. And it shows how to build this entire scenario which I think is pretty cool. So on that note, Carson, it's exactly 2 o'clock. I promised I'd be on time today, and I'm going to be on time. So I want to thank you very much, and I'm going to shut down in 3, 2, 1. Thanks, Carson. Everybody have a great day. Thanks for coming up to the garage.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.